we're going to talk about the zero product law. And the main idea with the zero product law is that if you have multiple factors and the equation is equal to zero, then one of those factors must be zero. So in math, when you do multiplication, if you have any number, let's say like 4, and you multiply it by 0, you have to get 0 out. So that's the idea with this. If we can determine what numbers give us 0 in each set of factors, then we can figure out what values give us 0. And in some cases, it's going to be more than 1. So we're going to kind of skip around a little bit. We're going to look at B first. And to first solve when you have an equation equal to 0 and there's multiple factors, you want to set each factor equal to 0. So you have 2x minus 5 equals 0 and x minus 4 equals 0. And you're basically solving two separate equations because there's two possible answers. So you could add 5 on both sides, which you get 2x equals 5, and then divide by 2. And sometimes you'll get decimals or fractions. You're better off erring on the side of writing as a fraction if you do get that decimal, and convert it by using the math button. In the case for the second one, you're just adding 4 on each side. So x is 4 is the other answer. So we got two answers of 4 and 5 over 2. Sometimes in Algebra 1, you refer to these as zeros. And zeros are where on a graph, if you have a quadratic, it's where that graph crosses the x-axis at. Those would be your zeros. Now we're going to get to a little more difficult one. And the idea with these is that to find those values that equal 0, you're going to have to set the equations to equal 0. So the idea is to first set your equation, like it says in directions, equal to 0, and then you want to factor the non-zero side. So if you take this first one, a, really what you want to do is get all your terms on one side. Now it does benefit you to have a positive x squared, or some sort of x squared, maybe 2x squared, have a positive value. So in this case, I notice there's an x squared here, so I'm going to move these terms on the other side. And again, you want to combine like terms like we talk about in the first unit. And as you move, just remember you're changing the signs when you move them. So I'm canceling out both terms on the other side. And you can do that one at a time or all together. And just make sure that you pay attention to signs as you go ahead and move. So in this case, I have positive 3 and positive 2, which is positive 5x. Negative 14 and negative 10 is negative 24. Now, after that, you're going to factor it. And it's a trinomial, so there's nothing I can factor out. I don't see a GCF, and 24 and 5 aren't perfect squares. So in this case, I'm going to have to do two sets of factors. In this case, I'll have x's for the first. It's a negative 24, so I'm going to have one positive and one negative. And for 24, I'm thinking of factors that might add to 5 with one of each sign. And I'm going to put an 8 and negative 3. So I can check that. I got positive 8 and negative 3, and 8 minus 3 is 5. And then I can set each part equal to 0. So on this side, I'll have x, if I subtract 8 on both sides, is negative 8. And I'll have x equals 3 if I add 3 to both sides. So that's the first one. We're going to look at B. Now on B, I notice that I have two x squared terms. So I'm going to have to move and decide which side to move on to. In this case, because one's a 3 and one's a 1, I'm going to subtract this x squared. Bring it over here and subtract it from the 3x squared. And again, like I said, you can do them all at once. It's easier if you write smaller, of course, because you got a lot of stuff that's going on. So I'm going to do them all at once. I have 3 terms on the right side. They're all going to cancel out. Then I have 2x squared now, because I had a negative 1. I have 12 minus 3, which is going to be positive 9. Negative 7 plus 2 is -5, and that's going to equal 0. So now, I got a couple ways I can do this. It's another trinomial. I just got to be careful because the first one is a 2. It's not a 1 with the x squared. So that means I'm going to have 2x and x. Now again, I have a -5. So I'm going to have to play around with the signs on this. And in this case, I'm going to try positive and negative first. And then for 5, I'll try 5 and 1, because that's it for those. So again, I'm checking for that middle one. So I got 1x and -10. So 1 and -10 is going to be -9, not +9. So that means that I screwed up my signs. So I'm going to go ahead and fix that. And like I mentioned in previous videos, you don't want to scribble everything out. Put a line through it, or maybe just mark an X near it, so you don't actually use it for something else later. So I'm going to take these two right now and do the factors. So I got one factor, which should be subtract 5 on each side, which would be -5. And then for this one, I'm adding 1 to both sides. And then dividing by 2. So my second answer will be 1/2. So I got -5 and 1/2. So when you're doing that zero product law, again, you got to be aware that there might be multiple solutions. And you can kind of figure that out on a graph if you were to graph this with those factors, because those factors will cross the x-axis that many times. Now the last part we're going to look at, and one of the important parts, is being able to relate this to graphs. So if you take a look at exercise 5, we're going to relate this function to the discussion we just had on those zeros. And I'm going to show you kind of the backwards way of figuring out what the factors are going to be. So if you notice, I have two x-intercepts. I have two zeros. Those intercepts fall at -1, 0, which is here, and 3, 0. So I have two x-intercepts. I have one at -1 and one at 3. Now those solutions are the opposite of the factors. So if I wanted to show what the factors were of this and this, I could show that because I know they equal 0. And to get -1 for x, I would have to have x plus 1, because -1 plus 1 will be 0. And to get the factor for 3, I'm going to have x minus 3, because 3 minus 3 would equal 0. So this right here, these factors are the factors of that equation that we have at the top for exercise 5. So you can find those factors two ways. If you know the zeros, if you know when they equal 0, you can find them from a graph, but you can also find them by setting the equation equal to 0, like we did in the previous examples.